So I'm going to be giving advice on how to spec enhancement, specifically Storm Strike, specifically lithically a PvP spec where you like to duel and maybe do some world PvP skirmishing like the stuff I used to do when I played. So the first thing I recommend is getting the mana talent rather than the shield specialization. The thing about shield specialization is you only really want to be using a shield versus, a few classes, largely rogues and hunters, but these people are going to be getting around your blocking skill pretty much entirely. So shield specialization is not really going to help you, whereas the extra mana, even though it's not a lot, it's worthwhile. You always want more mana. And I'm pretty sure that this applies to the extra mana you get from intellect. So this talent increases in strength with more intellect, I'm pretty sure. The next bit is pretty obvious. You're going to get these. This next bit might not be as obvious. I recommend getting this talent for the buff to Grounding Totem because Grounding Totem is one of the best totems, if not the best totem in the game. The alternatives aren't really that great. Lightning Shield, that's cool. This isn't that great because, once again, like, what would this be used on? Increasing your chance to dodge? Okay, so hunters are doing ranged attacks. Rogues are stunning you for much of the fight, so you're not going to be dodging versus them very much. Warriors are already easy to beat, and they also have overpower, so it's like, do you even really want a lot of dodge? It might actually be a disbenefit. What's the word for disbenefit? An ungood. It's an ungood, basically. Okay, it's not actually bad, but I think I made my point. So moving on, Flurry, of course, improved the Wind Fury, of course, Parry, of course. So at this point, you can just get whatever you want. You might want to get that, or maybe you might even want to get that if you want to give Wind Fury to other people. Doesn't really matter. This next selection is really not important. But then here is, of course, important. Okay, so the enhancement part is done. So now I recommend going over to Elemental. And the main reason I recommend this isn't because I've tried out Enhancement Restoration a bunch and I've determined that Enhancement Elemental is better. It's because I think Enhancement Restoration is dumb and boring, basically. So maybe I'll explain that. I'll explain that after I'm done talking about the Elemental build. Okay, so this is actually a remade video. I already made this video, but I changed my mind on something. I now think that Convection is worth getting, whereas beforehand I didn't recommend getting it. I still think Concussion's good though, because, well, let's see here. Okay, so you get Convection, and now you have these choices. I recommend this for the increase to Earthbind because there are some people, like, I think it's people exaggerate how much enhancement gets kited, but even so, you do get kited sometimes, and you probably are going to be wanting your Earthbind to be catching people more often than not. And if you look at the alternatives, it's like, okay, what could you have spent that in? 10% more damage from your fire totems? That's kind of lame. You could reduce some fire, frost, and nature damage. That's good, but I'm going to criticize this talent a little bit later. But okay, so I recommend this, and then you can pour some more points into Concussion, and then Clear Casting, of course. Reverberation is obviously awesome. And then you hit here where you can either get Eye of the Storm or Elemental Devastation, and I think a lot of enhancement people make the mistake of getting Elemental Devastation, but I just really don't think it's that good. If you actually look at it, like, okay, so it's based on your spell crit, and your spell crit probably isn't going to be very high, and if you do get a spell crit, then it's increasing your melee crit by 9%, so that's decent, but then it's only for 10 seconds, so it's like, okay, so you have to get a spell crit, and then for 10 seconds, you're going to get a small or a decent sized buff to your melee crit, and you might not even really be in range. You might get crowd controlled. Like, Elemental Devastation isn't going to be turning the tide in your favor very often at all. Just, it's not going to be proccing very often. Even with me, I had 10% spell crit, and even then I didn't, crit that out that often because it's only 10%, right? Now over here, Eye of the Storm, This is a very niche talent. I would agree that Elemental Devastation is probably better in kind of a wide way, if that makes sense. But Eye of the Storm is very good specifically for hunters. And it's not really that great for anyone else. But the reason why you want to get it anyways, I would argue, is because hunters are very hard to fight. And if you don't have this talent, then you can't really heal versus a hunter. Or by the time you're done getting a heal off, it's not even worth it anymore because you've lost more health than you've healed probably. You've probably also lost a bunch of mana from Viper Sting and whatnot. So Eye of the Storm gives you a much better chance versus hunters, and hunters are very hard for enhancement. So this is a talent that gives you a much better chance versus a hard counter. So that's why it's better than getting this kind of, okay, kind of, but not really that great. I mean, it looks great because it looks like it's an enhancement talent stuck in elemental. So you think, well, I'm enhancement, so why don't I get this? But it's like, it's just not that good. It just isn't compared to the this talent over here, which will help you versus your hard counter. And at this point, you have one talent point left, and I suppose you could put it here. It doesn't really matter too much where you put it. Anyways, I said I was going to criticize elemental warding, so I'm going to do that now. The thing about elemental warding is it is good, definitely, 10% mitigation, but if you think about the types of magic damage here, like who is this really helping you against? It's helping you, okay, with nature. Okay, so when you duel elemental shamans, it's going to help you. It's going to help you against druids very slightly, but it's like, okay, who cares? It's going to help you with mages, basically, because of the fire and frost. It's going to help you a teeny bit versus warlocks, but basically this is an anti-mage talent. But the thing is, mages are already, I would say, one of the classes that you have, like, some of the... You already have so many tools against mages because you have Earth Shock, and it's going to be on a 5-second cooldown because you have Reverberation, and then you have Grounding Totem, and your Grounding Totem is going to be on a 13-second cooldown because of this talent. And especially if you get the Zolga Rub Lightning Shield trinket, which really isn't like that hard to get. It's hard, but you can get it, and when you get that, it helps you against mages a whole lot, and you just have all these tools versus mages, and you don't really need this 10% damage mitigation. Not that it's not good. It is good. It's just, yeah, I would rather catch people in Earthbinds more often. I would rather catch hunters trying to run away from me a little bit more often. I would rather catch warlocks trying to run away a little bit more often. And oh, I also didn't mention this, but Earth's Grasp, it also buffs your Stoneclaw Totem. It makes it useful for dropping when fighting rogues and hunters because it keeps them in combat, and that can mess up some of the things hunters and rogues do. For example, if you're fighting a hunter and the hunter wants to feign death and drop a freezing trap, if you have if you have a Stoneclaw Totem out and if it's buffed, then the chances of the hunter successfully killing your Stoneclaw Totem, or rather probably the hunter's pet killing your Stoneclaw Totem, it's significantly reduced. And so what might happen is the hunter sicks their pet on your Stoneclaw Totem. It doesn't die because it has a lot of health, and then the hunter tries doing the feign death freezing trap, but then they're in combat because of your Stoneclaw Totem doing its AoE taunt thing, and then now the hunter can't freezing trap you, right? So this talent helps you out with Stoneclaw Totem too. So it's like a little added bonus. So this right here is the spec I'm recommending to people, and this is the spec I would be using if I still played the game. But there's restoration stuff. Really the main attraction to restoration is this talent here. Well, I suppose Nature Swiftness, but I'm going to talk about that in a second. So really the main attraction, if you look at all these other ones that you might end up getting, like they're just really not that helpful for you. Like, let's see here. That's not very helpful because you still want to be using lesser healing wave, so you have a lesser chance of being interrupted. So you would probably get this. That's not very helpful. That's not bad. That's cool, but it's still a 40 minute cooldown. Okay, so there's this. The problem with this is the only totem that would be awesome for this to buff is Tremor Totem, because so often you get feared outside of its range. But the thing is, Tremor Totem already has a 30-yard range by default, so I don't think this buffs your Tremor Totem, because if you read the description here, it says that it increases the range to 30 yards. So if Tremor Totem is already 30 yards, then this is not going to apply to it. Unless the tooltip's wrong. Maybe it's wrong. Someone could go test that for me and find out. Okay, there's this, and this is very, very good. This is awesome. And I would rather have this than the elemental version, although the elemental version is slightly better in a different way. I think healing focus is better overall, but I don't want to dismiss the usefulness of having Eye of the Storm apply to offensive spells, whereas healing focus only applies to healing, and it is only 70%. And I should also mention that with Eye of the Storm, you can press the sit button to kind of make it proc if you really, really need it to proc. Like if you're fighting a hunter and you're having very bad luck. Normally it procs all the time when fighting a hunter because you have so many crits hitting you. So you pretty much have it up like all the time versus hunters. But if you're having bad luck, you can press the sit button and hopefully the hunter's pet hits you and then procs it, and then you don't really lose a lot of health on account of the crit, and then you can heal, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so the main attraction, though, is Nature's Guidance, and this is obviously amazing, but later on in the game, especially if you can get a hold of the Blackwing Layer belt from Cro-Magus, or whatever that dog's name is, if you can get a hold of that cloth belt with +2 spell hit, then this isn't really necessary anymore. I can see why people would think this is necessary, but you can get hit from your gear, especially later on in the game. So the only thing left that you might want is Nature Swiftness, but the only way to get that is to give up Storm Strike. And obviously having Nature Swiftness is going to help you in certain matchups, but even if someone were to sit down and test it and prove, like without a doubt, that this spec I have on the screen right now, or something like this, is better than the spec I recommended, I would still recommend the spec I recommended because it's funner. Because if you have this spec, you don't have shocks on a 5-second cooldown. It's a 6-second cooldown, and you can really feel that when playing the game. You might think 1 second doesn't feel like a lot, but it really does when we're talking about the difference between 5 and 6 seconds, and we're talking about the ability you do all the time. And not only that, you're not going to have Storm Strike, and that is another, on-use ability, 20-second cooldown, so you're using it a lot, and then you're shocking a lot, and it's just a lot funner, whereas with this spec, you have to give up all of that just so you can have a 3-minute cooldown. Yeah, that's lame. And so you kind of, with this spec, you just kind of end up walking around auto-attacking people, and that's like really boring. Like, I don't recommend that. Someone might ask, why not go a little bit deeper into Elemental and get, let's say, Lightning Mastery, so that you're like this cool Elemental dude who's like shooting your lightning bolts, and you also melee, and it's like, wow, this guy's so cool. The reason why you shouldn't do that is because you can't really, you're not really meleeing, you're not meleeing, you're not fighting people with your weapon while you're casting your lightning bolts. So if you get this talent, then you need to make your character based around lightning bolt, because if you have this talent, then that's what you have to rely upon. But if you rely upon lightning bolts, then you might as well just go elemental with Nature Swiftness, because that's simply a better spec. Although arguably elemental is a better spec all around, but yeah. Yeah. Well, my mouth's getting dry, and I think I'm done talking, so I'm just